Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I am Anarita Bashalieva, along with co-host Dr. Victor Fett, Dr. Katerina Shrey, and our program producer, Professor Larry Sherey. We host a weekly discussion panel on Russia's war on Ukraine with guests from Ukraine, military experts, medical personnel, academics, artists, literary figures, and relief workers. Our panel is recorded and circulated nationally and internationally. We appreciate your comments and feedback. Special thanks to Marshall University Libraries and MU IT for making this weekly event possible. If you're joining us live on Teams, please feel free to use the chat to post any question for our guest. A quick greetings to our viewers in Ukraine from Dr. Katerina Shrey.
Вітаємо наших слухачів в Україні з глибоким покліном. Ми далі свідки вашого страшного терпіння і також вашої великої сили. Дякую вам за вашу участь в нашій тижневій програмі.
Thank you, Katerina. Today's guest will be introduced by Dr. Victor Fett.
Thank you, Anna and Katerina. Welcome everyone to MUkraine Week 204. And I'm very glad to greet and welcome Dr. Ulrich Schmid, Professor of Slavic Studies in the University St. Gallen, Switzerland. He joined us with a presentation of his new book he edited, which is in German language, The History of Ukrainian Literature, the first such German language book providing overview of the most important developments in the history of Ukrainian literature. Thank you, Dr. Schmid. The microphone is yours.
Thank you very much. I'll share my screen. And here you see the cover of our history of Ukrainian literature, which came out last summer in Germany. Unfortunately, we do not have an English translation yet, but we will have soon an Italian version of this history of Ukrainian literature. And here you also can see the names of our team. The team is a joint Italian-German language team. I myself come from Switzerland. Vera Faber and Alois Woldan are Austrians, and Alexander Kratochwil comes from Germany, and Alessandro Achilli, Maria Grazia Bartolini, and Giovanna Brogi are Italian. So it's basically really a Western endeavor. And I think that this doesn't come by chance. We deliberately wanted to produce a history of Ukrainian literature from a Western perspective for a Western audience. And I think probably the main consideration for us was that we thought that maybe people who did not grow up with Ukrainian literature within the Ukrainian culture can maybe explain better to a Western audience what Ukrainian literature is all about. What I want to do with you in the next 30 minutes is just to walk you through this book. And I just wanted to start with the question, why did we decide to produce this history of Ukrainian literature? And of course, it has to do with the Russian aggression against Ukraine, which also forced European Slavic departments to rethink their own canon. Unfortunately, until recently, Slavic studies in Western Europe were very Russocentric, and only recently Ukrainian studies became part of the academic canon. And if we look to the right and to the left, we see that there are no handbooks about Ukrainian literature, and basically our history of Ukrainian literature is an attempt to fix this situation. So if we take a first look at the table of contents, and maybe this is something that you also will notice if we go further on in the chronology. We decided, of course, to follow a chronological order, but this chronological order is as well disturbed through the fact that, of course, Ukrainian literature always takes place in different nation states, in different institutional context, and this is why sometimes we have to jump back and forth in the chronology to clarify, for instance, the situation of Ukrainian literature in the Habsburg Empire, while explaining what is going on in the Tsarist Empire. And of course, the same holds true for the situation in the 20th century when we talk about what was going on in the Second Polish Republic or in Prague for that matter, and simultaneously in exile or in Soviet Ukraine. We chose not to follow the customary pattern of histories of literature. So if you browse the table of contents, you will see that we rarely rely on traditional notions of epochs. So we don't talk about classicism, realism, romanticism. We make an exception for Baroque because this, of course, is a feature that is very unique for the Ukrainian literature. But generally, we focus on the institutional framework of the development of Ukrainian literature. I start with the introduction to this history of Ukrainian literature, which I wrote myself. And of course, I tried to come to terms with the theoretical foundations of writing a history of literature. And here I basically rely on the French critic Pascal Casanova, who published in 1999 a very influential book, La République mondiale des lettres, the Global Republic of Literature. And in this book, she tries to apply the theory of Pierre Bourdieu to world literature. And here you can see, for instance, in chapter 2, the empire of French. This is one of the basic presuppositions of Pascal Casanova, that she says that cultural empires are competing for power just as political empires do. And she makes an important reservation and says, as soon as a cultural literary empire starts to dominate the global scene, it also loses influence because, well, when French literature dominates, as it did, for instance, in the Tsarist Empire in the 18th century, it also starts a certain process of denationalization, because French literature is not anymore the literature of the French kingdom or later the French Republic, but it becomes a mode of expression in different political contexts, and one of them was also the Tsarist Empire in the 18th and also in the 19th century. Well, as an example, just remember the opening pages of Tolstoy's War and Peace that were written entirely in French, and this was completely normal for the Tsarist reading public at the time. What is especially important now for our Ukrainian context is the notion of the small or minor literatures. Pascal Casanova explicitly draws on Kafka, and Kafka is also the subject of this very important book by Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari, who wrote a book about minor literatures, and they chose Kafka as their subject. Kafka being a writer in a minority in multiple senses. Kafka was a Jewish writer in a Bohemian environment who chose German as his literary language. And Deleuze and Guattari basically take this entry from Kafka's diary from December 25, 1911 as their starting point. And Kafka here writes, the memory of a small nation is no smaller than that of a large one, and therefore processes the available material more thoroughly. Although fewer literary historians are employed, literature is less a matter of literary history than a matter of people. And I think this is something that can be applied also to the Ukrainian case. We also draw theoretically in our history of Ukrainian literature to Hans Robert Jauss, who revolutionized the theory of literary history in 1967 with this brochure, Literary History as a Provocation of Literary Studies. And Hans Robert Jauss basically introduced the reception side of literature. Because before Hans Robert Jauss, literary histories basically concentrated only on the production side and had mostly the authors of literary works in their focus. And Hans Robert Jauss well stated famously that, I quote, literary history must be viewed in the context of general history. The social relevance of literature becomes clear when the reader's literary experience enters the horizon of expectations of their life experience and changes it. And here, of course, you can see that Hans Robert Jauss operates also against the background of phenomenology. Horizon of expectation is clearly a Husserlian notion that now is being applied to the history of literature. And this is also something that we try to incorporate into our history of Ukrainian literature. Then, of course, we also have to take issue with the most famous historian of Ukrainian literature, Dmytro Czyżewski, who published in the 50s his History of Ukrainian Literature, which, of course, was a milestone, but which was also criticized by George Grabovich in 1981. And George Grabovich, the eminent Harvard historian of Ukrainian literature, took issue with Czyżewski's notion of Ukrainian literature as an allegedly incomplete literature. And George Grabovich pointed to the fact that literature per definitionem is an open system, and an open system cannot be incomplete. And I think this is also something that we took to heart when we conceptualized our history of Ukrainian literature. Now let me turn to the first chapter, which was written by the eminent Italian scholar of Ukrainian medieval literature, Giovanna Brogi, and she starts with the literature in Kievan Rus. And I think, of course, we also address the contested legacy of the Kievan Rus. Here you can see this very well-known monument to the Kievan Prince Vladimir, which was opened in 2016. In the lower right corner of the image, you see Vladimir Putin himself, assisted by the Patriarch of the Russian Orthodox Church. And he inaugurated this monument to Prince Vladimir. And it's quite strange that Prince Vladimir, was honored with the monument in Moscow. Why? Because Prince Vladimir was never in Moscow. He could never have been in Moscow. Why? Because Moscow did not even exist in the 10th century. But of course, this testifies to the fact that contemporary Putinist Russian history claims the Kievan legacy for the alleged 1,000-year lasting history of Russia. And this can also be observed in a recent textbook for Russian students. Here you can see that the Rus in the 9th and the 10th century covers basically Western Russia and, of course, including large swath of Ukraine. Now, what we have to keep in mind here is that the notion of Kievan Rus was coined only in the 19th century by Tsarist, loyalist historians like Vasily Kluchevsky. And it was the eminent Ukrainian historian Mikhailo Hrushevsky who challenged this notion of Kievan Rus by publishing his multi-volume history of Ukraine Rus, thereby highlighting that there is also a tradition that follows up from Rus to Ukraine. And here I have to tell an anecdote from my own university. Every year we organize a symposium, and we also welcomed Vladimir Klitschko, the boxer, the brother of Vitaly Klitschko, the mayor of Kiev. And I presented him with the book of our history of Ukrainian literature. And Vladimir Klitschko told me, well, this is a very important book because people have to know that people in the Kievan Rus did not speak Russian, but Ukrainian, which of course is nonsense. And I think what you can hold against Vladimir Klitschko is this very astute observation of the Ukrainian historian Ivan Rudnitsky, who said that the state of the Kievan princes was neither Russian nor Ukrainian, just as Charlemagne's state was neither German nor French, because all those national categories, Russian, Ukrainian, German, French, did not exist at the time. The next chapter draws on the longue durée of the Baroque, and as I mentioned earlier on, this is also in terms of the title of the chapter an exception, because here we mention the epoch of the Baroque just because it's a eminent Ukrainian achievement. We deal here also with the figure of Theophan Prokopovich, who was on the one hand side a major and important intellectual with a Ukrainian background, but at the same time, and this is also some kind of a biographical pattern, in his later career, he became the main propagator of Petrine imperialism when he moved to the imperial capital, St. Petersburg. The next chapter deals with what we call the Ukrainian literature as a challenge to Russian, or if you will, the Tsarist imperial culture. And here, of course, we have to remind ourselves of the political realities. This is a map of today's Ukraine in the political partitions of the late 18th century. And here you can see that the Russian Empire basically controlled only about a third of today's territory. And you still have this very important Polish influence in the right bank Ukraine. This also is something that we try to highlight in our history of Ukrainian literature, that not only Russian culture with the Russian language played a role in Pascal Casanova's sense of the republic of world literature, but of course also late medieval literature, and especially Baroque and humanistic and Renaissance literature in Ukraine was often written either in Latin or Polish. And only at the end of the 18th century, with the expansion of the Russian Empire under Catherine II, basically Ukraine became in its major parts part of the Russian Empire. And this is the situation that we face when we have to describe the situation of Ukrainian literature in the early 19th century. And here, of course, we have this book that marks the beginning of modern Ukrainian literature, also in a linguistic sense. And this book was notably published not in Ukraine in the proper sense of the word, but it was published in the imperial capital of St. Petersburg. And this is something that we will also observe later on in the 19th century, that, well, not Ukraine or Kiev, for that matter, was the main locus of the emergence of a Ukrainian national literature, but very often it was St. Petersburg. And the reason for that is obvious. Ukrainian intellectuals wanted to establish Ukrainian literature as a literary fact, as the formalists would have it, within the imperial culture. And this is also why this Malorossiyskaya Eneida that was written in Ukrainian has a cover with explanations in Russian. Then, of course, we also talk about Shevchenko, the early Shevchenko, well, also I try to present Shevchenko both as a painter and a writer who wrote most of his poetry in Ukrainian, most of his prose in Russian, although the limits do not exactly coincide, or this distinction does not exactly coincide also with the languages. We do have also exception on both sides. Then, of course, the self-presentation of Shevchenko is an important topic that we deal with. Here you see several examples. Shevchenko also liked cameo appearances in his own ethnographic sketches when he was in exile in today's Kazakhstan. Then we turn towards the construction of a national poet and the institutionalization of Ukrainian literature in the Tsarist empires. And this is basically one of the main assumptions of this history of Ukrainian literature, that Ukrainian literature in its outlook in the 19th century was a deliberate construction, and people who, or the literary entrepreneurs who engaged in the construction of Ukrainian literature in the 19th century, they were looking for the gaps in the system and tried to fill them in. And these literary entrepreneurs were these people, Panteleimon Kulish and Nikolai Kostomarov, and both were behind this very important journal, Asnova, which came out in 1861 and 1862, as well in St. Petersburg. And well, this journal tried to walk the thin line between Ukrainian assertion of a national consciousness on the one hand side, and on the other hand, of loyalism towards the imperial culture. And the contributions in this journal were both in Russian and Ukrainian language. And here you see also in the subtitle, Osnova was not a Ukraiński literaturny uczony wiesnik, but it was a Южно-Русский, South Russian journal. Although if you look at the contributions in the journal, the use of language oscillates between Ukrainian and South Russian. And here is a wonderful example for the construction of the Ukrainian literary canon. This is Marko Vovchok, which is a pseudonym for Maria Vilinskaya, who herself basically acquired Ukrainian literary culture as a choice. And she was basically constructed as a kind of a Ukrainian Georges Sand for Ukrainian literature by Panteleimon Kulish. The next chapter deals with Ukrainian literature in the Habsburg Empire. And here you can see that we have to jump back in chronology. We go back to the early 19th century and talk about the Ruthenian Trinity, as they were called. But we also talk about multilingual authors, just as, well, for example, like Olha Kobylianska, who basically wrote her debut as a German language writer because she was educated and socialized into the language of education and the language of Bildung of the Habsburger Empire, which of course was German. And here you can see the cover of her so-called Kleinrussische Novellen, which she wrote directly in German, which came out in Germany in 1902. She became a close friend of Lesia Ukrainka. Here you see one of the famous photographs. And well, she was located mainly in Czernowitz in the Austrian tradition, or Czernowtsi in the Romanian tradition. And it's quite interesting to follow her fate in the interwar period, because she lived a long life and always stayed in Czernowtsi. And of course, she, towards the end, was a Ukrainian writer within the greater Romanian state. But at the same time, the Soviet Ukrainian state also tried to recruit her for its own ideological purposes. And so she got this wonderful edition of her works that came out in Kharkiv. And you see, this was really top-notch when it came to the illustrations and to the quality of the edition. But at the same time, Olha Kobylianska never, well, supported the communist project, although the communist authorities in Soviet Ukraine even falsified statements that Olha Kobylianska allegedly issued in favor of Soviet rule. And here again you see the map of today's Ukraine in the 19th century. And here, of course, you again see this dualism between the Russian Empire on the one hand and the Habsburg monarchy on the other hand. And this is also where we talk about Ivan Franko, who was, of course, a major figure also in the unification of Ukrainian literature. This is something that also started towards the end of the 19th century, and especially in the early 20th century. Ivan Franko also tried in his private life to institutionalize this Ukrainian unity when he decided to marry a woman from eastern Ukraine. And maybe this is my last example that I will give to you. This is a chapter that we decided to include, although it doesn't exactly deal with literature in the narrow sense of the word, but I think the political discussions about Ukrainian nationhood in the late 19th century were extremely important just because Ukrainian literature was the main carrier of Ukrainian national consciousness in the late 19th century. And here, of course, we have to talk about Mikhailo Drahomanov, who famously also was a resident of Geneva in Switzerland in a certain phase of his life. And I wanted to draw your attention to this brochure, which he issued in 1878 in his own print shop in Geneva. And this is basically a report that he wrote for the World Congress of Literature that took place in 1878 in Paris, and which was headed by Victor Hugo. And here the title translates La littérature ukrainienne proscrite par le gouvernement russe, which means in English, Ukrainian literature prohibited by the Russian government. And Mikhail Drahomanov, in this brochure, which is about 45 pages long, gives a short account of the history of Ukrainian literature. And he wanted to attract the attention of the literary circles in Western Europe. Alas, this was all to no avail, so this brochure largely went unnoticed. And Drahomanov pointed at the dire situation of Ukrainian literature in the late 19th century, which was described by people like Fedir Savchenko already in 1930. But this was, of course, also prohibited later on in the Soviet times and was reprinted only later. This is a scientific account of the Ems Ukas from 1876 and its consequences for the chances of publication of Ukrainian literary works in the Tsarist Empire. And then in this chapter, we also talk about Boris Hrynchenko, who was also one of the very important figures of the institutionalization of Ukrainian literature in the Tsarist empires, especially with his dictionary of the Ukrainian language from the beginning of the 20th century. But he himself, could not publish his works under his own name, and this is an example of a fake edition of his literary works, which he was forced to publish under the pseudonym of Vasil Tchaichenko. The photograph here is correct, but of course the name is a pseudonym behind which he hides. Good. I think my time is up, and I will be happy to take questions if you have questions.
Thank you, Dr. Schmid. We already do have questions because some of our regular viewers here are very interested in literature. And here is Dr. Deutsch. Please, Leonard.
Well,
Hi.
Dr. Dean Deutsch, before
Yes.
you start speaking, let me introduce you. So this is Dean Leonard Deutsch. He is the former dean of our Marshall University's graduate program. But before that, he was a literature professor in the Department of English. And so you are talking to a very well-versed colleague.
Well, Katerina, what I was going to say was when I met you, if I recall correctly, you were translating from Ukrainian into English. And what I'm wondering is there an overlap between the work you did, the translations that you did from Ukrainian into English, with some of the work that Ulrich covers in his history of Ukrainian literature. So I'm encouraging a conversation between you and Ulrich.
Oh my goodness. Well, I can start by saying thank you so much, Dr. Schmid, for the immense work that you have done. A lot of the titles were familiar to me. I grew up as the child of Ukrainian immigrants in Philadelphia, and so I went to Ukrainian Saturday school from kindergarten on to 12th grade. I took the Matura exam, which I believe is a European thing. And so a lot of those names were familiar. I did work on a lot of translations, Tkach, Ponchar, I guess more familiar ones. We definitely, I was part of a team that translated Slava Ukraini, which is the Ukrainian epic, or the Slavic epic, I should say, because it's Church Slavonic, I think. And so there, I suppose there are going to be some overlaps between this. And right now, currently, I just finished editing a translation of stories about the war from contemporary Ukrainian writers. But all that to say, thank you, Dean Deutsch, for the opportunity to make this connection. But Dr. Schmid, thank you for this. This is great. It's like a tour de force of Ukrainian literature. The names you mentioned, Ivan Franko, Lesho, Ukrinka, Taras Shevchenko, these are all names Ukrainian children grew up knowing before they even go to school. We memorize their poems, we recite their poems and whatnot. But there are also other things, like you mentioned Kotlяревsky's Eneida, which Ukrainians count that as the first work of, or at least Ukrainians in the immigrant community count that as the first work of modern Ukrainian literature. That's kind of like the text that introduces this new period of Ukrainian literature. And so it was just pure joy listening to your presentation. Absolutely pure joy listening to your presentation. So I see that we have a guest, Maria Vardan. I said, let's see, your whole name's not coming up in my thing. Please go ahead, Vardanian. Please, by all means, take the microphone.
I can introduce myself briefly. My name is Marina Vardanyan. I'm a professor of Ukrainian literature of Kryvyi Rih State University, but currently I'm a visiting scholar professor at Heidelberg University. First of all, let me thank you very much for this important work for Ukraine, I think. Of course, there are books about Ukrainian literature, as you mentioned, but at the current stage, especially in English or German, such comprehensive studies are still rare. So I was pleasantly surprised that such a book has appeared in German. You cover in your presentation, during your presentation, the main canon of Ukrainian literature, yeah, sure, highlight key figures and works, and I also found it very interesting to hear how you present the history of Ukrainian literature. I haven't read the book, honestly, completely yet, but I definitely will. And I've already shared your book with my colleagues. I have only one question, short question, maybe comment, because I have saw such as spelling. So you use some orthography. I think it's not German, but rather reflects an interlingual adaptation of Slavic transliteration for a German-speaking audience. Probably, I guess, it was influenced by Czech or a Polish system with this diacritical marks over letters to convey sounds that do not exist in German. Why I'd like to ask this question, because you know that history, literature, culture, and language as well, even in English or German, are very important for Ukrainian citizens and Ukrainian around the world. So I think it's like not exactly close to real Ukrainian spelling, because we try this spelling unificate, especially, for example, Kyiv. For us, it's very important, Kyiv. But with these surnames, I think it's very also important, for example, Shevchenko. So could you please...
Yes, well, I think this is probably a result of the big, beautiful ocean that separates the US and Europe, as your president would have it. Because, of course, we do not use the Library of Congress transliteration, because our book was written in German. But we use the usual German scientific transliteration. And of course, we do not use the Russian transliteration, but the Ukrainian transliteration. And this is, for instance, also why we thoroughly and consequently always write about Kyiv and not Kiev in our book. So we use the Ukrainian names, and I think we chose this scientific transliteration just for the sake of exactly what you mentioned, that you can exactly retranslate the names into the Ukrainian original.
Okay, thank you. Because I saw this diachronic characters in Chizhevsky works. I guess it's
in
American
Europe very common. We just in Europe use this diacritical signs that come, in fact, from Czech, but it's very common in Slavic studies in Europe.
Thank you. Thank you, Marina. Thank you, Dr. Schmid. I have a question here from my old friend Andrei Rogachevsky, who comes to us from Arctic Circle or beyond.
Well beyond.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Ulrich, for an interesting survey of what people should know. It's a must for libraries, universal libraries anyway, that teach or planning to teach Ukrainian literature to students. I don't know if there are any plans to translate into English, because my students would rather, I'm afraid, read in English, something like that, than in German or Italian. It's the practical thing. But I'll be happy to order a copy for my university library, unless it's open access anyway. Is it open access?
It's not, unfortunately.
Okay, no problem. Yeah, I'll be ordering this as soon as possible. But the practical question is what we encounter here when we want to put together a literature course like that is that very little has been translated into either Scandinavian languages or English. These are the languages that my students are most comfortable with, practice shows. And of course, the level of Ukrainian, we have a Ukrainian course, but it's only 2 semesters for beginners for the time being. The level of Ukrainian would not be enough to ask them to read much in the original. So how much of your course has been translated, or the subjects in your course has been translated into German?
Well, what we did, you will see if you open the book that there are no footnotes, because we do not claim that we really open new fields in the investigation into Ukrainian literature. We, of course, want to describe what is going on in the history of Ukrainian literature based on the state of the art. But we also added at the end of each chapter a survey of existing translations of Ukrainian literature into German. And there we, of course, have this very strange situation, or maybe even not surprising situation, that as we go on in the chronology in the 20th century, and especially in contemporary Ukrainian literature, we do have a lot of authors that are being translated into German. Yuri Andruchovich, Sofia Andruchovich, Serhii Zhadan, of course. But we do have this very paradoxical situation that, well, all those authors that I've been talking about that form the inner core of the Ukrainian literary canon only recently have been translated into Ukrainian. And maybe you heard about this very ambitious project, which was initiated by Tanya Malyarchuk, who is based in Vienna, and she, with a German colleague, has this very important and impressive new project of a Ukrainian library. And they have a very smart approach. They approached a prominent contemporary Ukrainian writer and asked him or her to make a selection of the text of the Ukrainian classics. So the first two volumes are already out, and the first volume is, of course, Shevchenko, and the one who chooses and selects the text from Shevchenko is Yuri Andruchovich, and the second volume is Lesia Ukrainka, and this is managed by Tanya Malyarchuk herself. We unfortunately we do not have plans for an English translation, and the reason for that is simple, because this German and Italian version of this history of Ukrainian literature is a spin-off from a larger project, and we've been working on that already for 10 years, and this larger project is headed by George Grabovich. And it's a very ambitious project, and we already do have a construction site of chapters and texts, more than 1,000 pages. So this English version of the history of Ukrainian literature has a far-reaching goal, and we, for the German and Italian academic context, we just decided we need these handbooks right now, and this is why we decided to go ahead with the German and the Italian editions.
Fair enough. Are the Ukrainian authors who write in Russian part of your survey, please? Such
Of course.
as Kurkov, Andrei Kurkov, and others.
Of course. I can show you the overview of the last chapters, and Andrei Kurkov, of course, is there, and we also cover those contemporary authors of Ukrainian literatures who've chose to leave the Russian language as their literary language and to migrate into Ukrainian, for instance, like Volodymyr Rafeyenko, or notably also Olena Styashkina, who has this wonderful novel that basically starts in Russian and over the course of the novel then migrates into Ukrainian, and the language question, of course, plays a role, and it was also our aim to show how the war affects the situation of literature. I think one important case in point is also Sofia Andruchowicz, who as a first reaction wrote that she's not sure that she can continue to write. Maybe, well, she feared that she would lose her own language, but then eventually, of course, she decided to go on writing essays also in Ukrainian.
Thank you very much for such a detailed and comprehensive answer, and for your lecture today. We'll be in touch.
Thank you, Andrei. And before I have a question here from Anara as well. Before I ask, I wanted to insert my own language, my own question, which is relevant to Andrei's. We are here in this group involved with translators who translate modern, mostly wartime poetry from Ukrainian authors written both in Ukrainian and Russian, and there is a very influential group, Kapilka, which was on this show 3 times. They are based internationally, and they published several anthologies, mostly in English, but also in French. I wanted just to ask if any of these plans exist in German.
Yes, we do have plans here, and we're lucky that one of our authors, Alexander Kratochvil, is at the same time a very prolific translator of Ukrainian contemporary literature. So he has translated most of Oksana Zabushko, also Sofia Andruchowicz. Of course, it's always a little bit difficult to find a good translator for Ukrainian poetry, but there is a lot going on in, well, the German context, because, of course, we also do have a lot of war refugees in German language countries in Europe. And I think this is precisely the moment where the reader's attention is also focused on Ukrainian literature. And so, for instance, Serhiy Zhadan, who in our history of Ukrainian literature, just as Shevchenko, also figures in 2 chapters, before the war and after the war. Zhadan is widely translated into, his poetry is also widely translated into German, and we also tried to demonstrate how Zhadan today acquires the statue of a national poet of Ukraine in the 21st century.
Thank you. Thank you. Anara, please. Your question.
Oh, thank you very much for your very timely, very comprehensive discussion. There are many points where we can elaborate. And I just, because I read Russian, actually, newspapers, news, and also all this, everything on internet, I see the temperature in the society. So that's why I have some questions. So doctrine of Moscow as a third Rome is increasingly popular from at the beginning. I just noticed why initially they have just TV show about Byzantine Empire, then they changed textbooks and so on. So that nobody stopped them, nobody noticed this, but it began long ago. And Moscow is seen as a political and cultural success of Constantinople. That means that it might be threat even for Turkey in the future. And their bigger plan to restore and expand Russian Empire, not Soviet Union, but Russian Empire, using hard and soft power. We mostly focus on hard power, but we talk less about propaganda, Russia Today, and many other actually means they use. Can you explain why the 19th century ambitions are still popular in Russia and other countries. Even here, I notice some young people, Russian, or maybe they even actually Americans already, by actual these ideas that that Russia is the third Rome and that actually culturally more advanced are still popular and increasingly popular among the young generation, younger people. So, and my question, what could be done to address this propaganda, such as the Third Rome, such as Russia's cultural grandeur and superiority, using literature or some other means? So that's why it's still unclear what we can do. Thank you.
Well, given the complete lack of democratic legitimation of the current Russian regime, the Kremlin also has to resort to ideological resources of legitimation, and all these historical discourses you just mentioned are part of this. And I'm right now working on a project about Carl Schmid in Eastern Europe. And this is not only true for Russia, but it's also true for countries like Poland or Hungary or the United States, for that matter, where, well, democratic legitimation becomes more and more fragile. And also people like Donald Trump, they resort to legitimations that have to do more with political theology than with democratic and republican concepts from the Enlightenment. And I think you asked the question, what can be done against this? I think it is especially the role of culture that must be highlighted here. We have to tell especially the younger generation that every freedom, every political freedom is based on the freedom of the word. And I think here it's also useful to point to the tradition of both the Ukrainian and the Russian emigration. And if you look, for instance, at people like Alexander Gerzen in the 19th century, he was very lonely in his Polonophile and Ukrainophile statements in the 1860s, and the problem was very comparable to our days when Alexander Herzen basically backed and supported the Polish uprising in 1863. He lost all his progressive readership in Russia, in Tsarist Russia, because there was this, well, fundament and this basis of great Russian patriotism that had no understanding for other national projects within the imperial context. And the same holds true also for the Ukrainian projects. For instance, Nikolai Kostomarov, whom I mentioned, he wrote anonymously an article about Ukraine in Alexander Herzen's journal, The Bell. And this is, I think, the tragedy of all the Russian progressive opposition leaders, which in a way is also reflected in many important figures. Well, starting with Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who was against Ukrainian independence, going on to Joseph Brodsky, who was against Ukrainian independence, and ending up with the widow of Alexei Navalny, who also has little understanding for Ukrainian independence. And she was not able to connect to the circles of Ukrainian independence.
Yes, I just like that you mentioned Herzen. I did not know about this, but I liked actually Bakunin's statement that there should be United States of Siberia in the future. So that's actually because he saw the Russia's problem in the 19th century already. It's a very good actually
Well, I think this
handle?
is also one problem that the official name of Russia is Russian Federation, but of course it doesn't function as a federation. It's a very centralist state, and if you look what is happening right now in Chechnya, this is an enormous problem for Russia because they will have to deal with Ramzan Kadyrov's succession in Chechnya. And it's very clear that Moscow will call the shots and not the local government in Grozny.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. And we can take one more question, please, from Yefim Somin, our regular contributor. Please, Yefim.
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you very much, Dr. Schmid. Very interesting. I can actually read German, so I was able to follow where I could see actually the last page you showed was not as clear. A couple of points about me, and then I have a question. My first 30 years were in that old evil empire, and in particular St. Petersburg. That was mentioned a couple of times today. We knew, there was the Rashevchenko. The only poem, was known was "Jak umru, to pochavайте, как umru, похороните." Maybe Dovzhenko also, but nothing else really about Ukrainian literature at that time. Only recently I learned that my wife actually grew up in the house where Shevchenko was living when he was still a serf of Engelgard. So there is that connection. Lately,
Wow.
yeah.
Wow, that's actually that's really cool.
It's a Makhavaya Ulitsa, where the Theater Institute as well is, and in that same house, Vasily Stasov and Mikhail Glinka also lived at certain time, at their own times. Yes, that is the house, right? So I studied recently for a couple of years. I actually studied with an instructor, Ukrainian, and she even provoked me to go into competition with Yuri Andrukhovich in writing in Ukrainian about cities that I've seen and he has seen. And I also translate. I've translated a bit from Ukrainian to English. That's going to be published. What I was wondering, and I suppose the answer would be positive, I know if how much you cover. You mentioned Andrukhovich already, yes. How much you cover in that book, later literature and even the 21st century. For instance, one of the interesting discoveries for me was Mykola Kulish, something like Mira Mazayla in my studies, and the really outstanding genius of Kotyabinski, whose prose, I think, is even more striking than the film that was made based on it. So does your book cover the period, pretty much, the period of the 20th century and maybe some of the 21st?
Yes, let me show you. It was just for reasons first of time that I did not cover the 20th century very much and the 21st century. I myself authored the chapters on the 19th century, and my colleagues took care of the 20th and the 21st century. So let me share the screen so that you can have a look at the table of contents again. So here you see chapter 13, where we talk about the modernism, and it already starts in chapter 12. And here I just show you quickly the slides with the political situation in the 20th century. Then we talk about Volodymyr Vinnychenko, both as a politician, a painter, and an author. Then we talk about the avant-garde, which is a very prominent phenomenon in Ukrainian literary history. Here also about Vaplite, this literary association, the futuristic associations. Then we talk, of course, about Mykola Chwilowy. We also talk about the executed Renaissance, which was given this name only posthumously, if you want. Then here you have the next chapters that we have. This is literature in exile. We separated literature in exile also from the literature in Poland, because Poland, well, was only half exile, because there always has been a Ukrainian population. Then we talk here about the situation in Soviet Ukraine. And here you see the final chapters where we basically quote Tamara Hundorova with her post-Chernobyl library. Here we cover the early decades of Ukrainian independence. Then in page 18, we follow the literary evolution and the literary responses to Euromaidan and the Russian war against Ukraine. And this, of course, had a tremendous impact also on the literary production in Ukraine.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Schmid. Thank you, Efim. I think we are out of time here, and we again need to thank Dr. Ulrich Schmid of St. Gallen, Switzerland. And I will ask Katerina, please, if you're here, to say a few words to our viewers in Ukraine, and also maybe before this, we can hear a couple of more words from you and Dr. Schmid, concluding our wonderful session today.
Dr. Schmid, any final words for today?
Well, thanks for having me. I'm always proud and honored if I can present our book to an interested audience. I will also present the book next week at the University of Heidelberg in Germany, and later in this year we will have the gathering of all the German language Slavists in Jena, which is also in Germany, and I will present the book there as well. And I very much do hope that our book, which is a teamwork, I want to highlight this and thank also all my collaborators in this book. We hope that this book will advance Ukrainian studies in German Slavic departments.
How wonderful. How wonderful. Thank you so much. I put in the chat 2 links to where anybody on the live program can access the book, can purchase the book, and we'll include that in our further circulation of today's program. Thank you for using your talents in this cause. Thank you very much. And now, the final word to our brothers and sisters in Ukraine. Дорогі браття і сестри в Україні, ми зберігаємо вас у наших щоденних думках і молитвах. Нехай милосердний Бог тримає вас у своїй опіці. До наступного тижня. Прощаємося.
Слава Україні!
Героям слава!
Героям слава!